If we have not met, because some of you are new, my name is Megan. I am the manager at St. Jude Wellness Center, and I am a registered dietitian. And today we are not just talking about food. Today we are talking about all kinds of lifestyle strategies for the topic of cognitive vitality, which is a big word for brain health. Let me get this started. And if you've not come to these webinars before, please know that I always leave time for questions at the end. Please put your questions in the chat. I won't answer them as we go. I will answer them at the end. And if for whatever reason you need to pop off the webinar early, I will still answer all the questions, and the recordings will be on our website afterward. So know that you can come back to all of that. All right, so definitely put your questions in the chat box and we will get a move on. So brain health, woo, that went forward on me. Brain health is a big topic right now. It's becoming more and more prevalent in discussions around lifestyle because we have more and more research to actually show us that there are a lot of things we can do on our own, from activities to fitness to socializing to food, that can really truly make a big difference in our brain health and preventing cognitive decline, which is really the bigger concern here. So let's talk about what cognition is first before we talk about what it means to have cognitive decline and cognitive vitality. Cognition is how we understand our world. It's how we function within our world, really based on sensory inputs. So there are what we call 4 domains, or some people call them knobs. So you can think of them as volume knobs. 4 domains of cognition that really create what we consider and interact with our world around us. One is memory. And again, we can think of these as knobs. We can have kind of lower memory, higher memory. We're all in a spectrum of how memory functions. And there's long-term memory and there's working memory. And we're going to kind of get into what impacts all these areas. There's attention, and attention can impact memory, right? Sometimes we think our memory is going haywire, but it's really because we weren't paying attention in the first place. We weren't paying attention to where we put those keys. So it's not that we're losing our memory when we can't find the keys. We weren't paying attention. Executive function. Think of executive function as your CEO. It is what kind of creates our whole interaction with people. It's our rational thought, our ability or inability to stop ourselves from saying something, kind of that filter. It's how we adapt, our adaptation. Executive function is how we pull memory and attention together and create our view on the world and our opinions. And then processing speed. How quickly can you catch that ball? Driving is a big one that comes into processing speed. So as we talk about lifestyle factors and lifestyle strategies to impact our cognitive health, these are the areas that are being looked at in research, is how can we do things on our own without medication, without medical intervention, to turn the dial up on each of these 4 cognitive domains. So cognitive decline is when those knobs get turned down. And that is the #1 concern for people over the age of 60 in the United States. On every single report that ever comes out, this is what we're worried about. We're worried about losing that thought, that ability of who we are and how we think and how we interact with the world. So this is a big chart, but this is a spectrum of cognitive decline. There is some cognitive decline that comes with aging. It comes with pretty much aging. The over 18 years old is when we start to see a very slow decline. And that's what those green arrows are on top. Everyone experiences a little bit. We can start to feel that. And there's a spectrum. Those green arrows are at different levels. Just depending on who we are, we're going to have different experiences of what is considered normal cognitive decline. And then there's preclinical cognitive decline. That's the blue arrow. Still not super significant. You can still interact in the world and you can remember things and probably drive and probably still have really great conversations with people. But it's probably slightly noticeable in those who know you really well. You might be experiencing this maybe just in one knob, maybe just in the memory area, but everything else is just fine. Or maybe it's just in the processing speed. Maybe you don't drive quite as well as you used to, but otherwise we're okay. That's the preclinical. Then there's mild cognitive impairment, and this is where you're probably noticing something. You're noticing that some of those dials have turned down and we're starting to maybe have some concern, but you're still able to do things on your own and be more or less independent. And then there's the various stages of dementia. And with dementia, once that red line hits, it tends to drop pretty drastically, pretty quickly, and there's not a whole lot we can do in that red arrow space in the lifestyle capacity. There's medical interventions, but as far as lifestyle strategies go, there's not a whole lot that's going to move the needle very far. So where we want to intervene is here in the earlier stages, where we can do a lot to slow when that red arrow hits, if at all. And I also entered this text over on the right side of, there's also the foggy brain type of cognitive decline that comes along with oftentimes other types of treatments, cancer treatments, hormone imbalances. Lots of women feel this way in the perimenopause and menopausal stages, just chronic stress in general, lack of sleep. We feel the effects cognitively, even though that may not be a clinical diagnosis and it may not be long-term or permanent, but there are still things we can do to kind of bring us back to normal cognition, even if it's an acute symptom. So another graph for you is your brain's ability to change in the blue versus the amount of effort it requires to change. So this is something we call neuroplasticity, your brain's ability to fire and connect and, I just saw something new, and so I'm going to change my thought process on that. Or again, an easy example is driving, like, oh, there's a red light suddenly, I need to be able to stop. The more your brain is able to respond to things, it requires less change. And so kind of, if you think back on the previous slide, the further we get along cognitive decline, the more effort it takes to create those synapses. So while this is frustrating, and sometimes people think this is a bad thing, I look at this as a positive slide of, there is never a time when your body cannot change the brain. There's never a time when your brain can't create new synapses and improve the brain health. It just may take more effort the further along cognitive decline we are. And I have that little picture of the match, because a lot of people in the cognitive health space talk about it as lighting a match in a forest. If your forest is really green and not dried up, it's going to take more of a match, a bigger flame to kind of make it all blow up into flames. Versus if you have a really dry fire, that's going to be a pretty simple match. That's what we want to talk about with cognitive reserve. The more reserve we have, the more lush and anti-fire that forest is, and the harder it is to light the match. So the less cognitive reserve we have, the less of a gas tank we have, the easier it is to light that match. And then once you light the match and the forest goes up in flames, that's that major red arrow of the cognitive decline. So we want to do everything we can to build up what this idea is of cognitive reserve. And this has been studied so much, it's a true term in the medical world, it's really your gas tank full of cognitive ability. The higher it is, think of the more gas you have in the tank, the more you have to lose. And there was a huge study done, and it was published around 2009 called the Nun Study. And they studied about 50 nuns. And these nuns were very active in their community. Like up until the day they died, they were doing things. They were connecting with people. They were starting different types of nonprofits. They were very, very active in using their brains. Then after the nuns died, they did brain autopsies. And what they noticed was a majority of them had what was considered clinical Alzheimer's disease, clinical dementia. They had all the plaques. They had all the things that showed they should have. I'm going to ask that whoever is not muted, please mute yourself. Even though they had clinical dementia in their brains, none of them showed symptoms of it. And so what they showed was these nuns had such high cognitive reserve. They were so brain active their whole lives. They did all these strategies we're going to talk about today, that they had a huge cognitive reserve. And therefore, even though their brain had plaques and they didn't have a lot of synapses going on, they didn't feel the symptoms of dementia. And that's just what this chart is the higher your cognitive reserve, the later on we can push that lighting of the match, that we can kind of slow the onset of that red arrow decline and overall have a better quality of life. So what can we do? The point of today's webinar is what can we do to build that cognitive reserve on our own so that we have a ton of cognition later in life. And these are the things that impact our cognitive reserve. We have things that healthfully, positively impact our cognitive reserve and things that negatively impact it. So on the positive side, our mental stimulation. We're going to talk about better types of mental stimulation, brain games, things like that. We'll talk about that toward the end. Lifestyle, we're going to talk a lot about physical activity today. Social stimulation is different than mental stimulation. We'll talk about cognitive remediation. That's more like cognitive therapy, so we won't really talk about that as much today. Physical activity, stress, and sleep. Okay, if you're getting enough sleep and you're reducing your stress, those are all things that positively impact cognitive reserve. Things that negatively impact cognitive reserve: poor education, mood disturbances, and this is more medical diagnoses of mood disturbances, poor nutrition, alcohol and drug abuse, poor health in general. So comorbidities like diabetes and heart disease, we know are directly related to lower cognitive reserve, and other types of inflammatory medical conditions. So some of these things on the right, you may not even have that much control over. Let's say some of these medical conditions, if you have an autoimmune disorder, but that gives you all the more motivation to do as much as you can with the green stuff on the left, so we can combat the negative coming in. Because remember that there is never a time your brain can't get better. It just takes more effort, okay, if we have a lot of the stuff on the right going on. So let's spend a lot of time on activity, because physical activity, exercise, this is where you get the most bang for your buck when it comes to brain health in general. All of the other stuff makes a difference for sure, but hands down, you talk to any physician, you talk to any researcher, if you say, what's one thing I can do to build my cognitive reserve, they're going to say exercise. You get the most out of it. You get just a huge return on your investment for every minute spent exercising. So here's what happens to the brain when we exercise. We have a behavioral impact. Our mood and our energy improve. And anyone who exercises knows this. Maybe if you've been sedentary for a while, your first couple exercise sessions don't improve your mood, but you feel it over time. We have true releases of endorphins. We feel better. And then we have this positive feedback loop, because the better we feel, the more we want to move and exercise, the more we release those endorphins and the GABA, that's anti-inflammatory, that's another endorphin. So we truly are improving our immune health. And then again, we're exercising again because we feel good and we want to move, and it just continues. We build confidence and self-esteem, which combats that mood disturbance and mood disorders impact on the brain. We sleep better and we better handle stress when we exercise. And again, this is the more we exercise, the more we feel these. And we have better overall cognition. Every research study that has ever studied memory, processing speed, attention span, any of those domains of cognition, all show that you get very acute and very long-term benefits in all of those domains when we exercise consistently. We're also getting micro benefits. So whenever you exercise, you are truly developing more neurons and more neuronal connections, more of that synapse connection, those explosions in the brain where we're learning something and doing something and creating more cognition. What we're doing when we exercise is we create what's called growth hormones, things like you may have maybe heard of IGF before, or BDNF, and these are essentially miracle grow for the brains. We only can create these growth hormones from exercise, and then little bits from sleep as well, but mostly it's exercise that creates these and allows for the brain to continue flourishing and developing and having that neuroplasticity. We also have micro benefits in the areas of our vessels, our blood vessels. All types of brain conditions are cardiovascular. Anything we have that is a cognitive decline is usually ultimately related to a lack of blood flow, not enough getting to the brain. So anytime we talk about brain health, we should be talking about improving blood flow. So when we can improve our blood flow, improve our blood pressure, create nice, strong blood vessels, we are doing well for our brain. And then we have macro benefits in the brain. So the actual structure and function of all the different areas of the brain truly improve, and we get growth. We see brain shrinkage with cognitive decline. So what we want is growth. We want that brain to keep growing and getting bigger, and the structures to get bigger, not just connections to happen, but true growth. And that happens when we exercise because of those growth factors. There's actually been a lot of research done on how much, and we can improve our growth the growth of different areas of our brain by up to 80% by just following standard 150 minutes of physical activity every single week. And we'll get to those guidelines here in a second. So lots of improvement from exercise. This is, please don't think you have to memorize this, but this is showing the different areas of the brain and how different types of exercise improve these areas in different ways. So for instance, we have the cerebellum to the bottom right over here. Coordinative exercise. So that's consider something like catching a ball and throwing a ball. You're coordinating, watching the ball come and catching it at the same time. That's coordination. Skill and motor learning. So learning a sport, something like ping pong, any type of like interaction with physical activity where there's rules around it. So you have to learn the skill while you're playing the game. And then open skill activity. And that's where there's no guideline, something like just running for running's sake. All three of these types of activity can actually improve the volume, so the growth of the cerebellum, how the cerebellum works, which because of how the cerebellum functions in the brain, improves your coordination and your attention. So those two areas of cognition, and you have greater blood volume. So those specific types of activities, mostly sports and learning skill activities, specifically work to improve that area of the brain, which works with our coordination and attention. So this is just to kind of drive home the point that there's no better activity than others. They all do different things in the brain. They all function in different ways. So basically, the more the merrier. The more types of activities you can get, the more all the areas of your brain are going to benefit. So when we talk about physical activity for brain health, the outcomes we're looking for are a better balance and a better gait, better vascular health, because remember, we want to keep pushing that blood to the brain, better cognition, and just your ability to do activities of daily living. These are all things that have been researched as outcomes from doing physical activity. So what do we need to do? Here are the guidelines for exercise for brain health. So the left and the middle, cardio and resistance, those are general for the United States. These are standard set guidelines for Americans. The one on the right, which we'll get to in a second, is more specific to brain research. So cardio guidelines, this means aerobic. This means bringing up your heart rate to different types of levels. The recommendation is 150 to 300 minutes per week of moderate to vigorous activity. 150 minutes is 2.5 hours. So 2.5 hours of any type of movement that brings your heart rate up is going to meet that bottom end of normal guideline for cardio. 300 minutes is 5 hours. Okay, so anywhere from 2.5 to 5 hours a week of activity, spread out however you want. You want to get those 2.5 hours in on just 2 really intense days? Cool, you got it. You can also spread it out to 7 days a week of more 20 to 30 minute activities. But this type of activity where we're bringing up our heart rate improves the size and structure of our cerebellum and our basal ganglia. What does that mean? It means that we're improving mostly our attention and our memory in those areas. We're improving our blood flow, so we're reducing the formation of plaque. Downside of cardio activity is it's often not very focused on the muscle, which is really important for some of the other areas of the brain. And it can be monotonous. If we're just someone who likes to go on really long, vigorous walks and we're not doing other types of cardio activity, we may not be stimulating the brain quite enough. So those are things to consider. If you're someone who is running or biking or walking quite a bit, but maybe not doing other types of activity, we may want to change that up a little bit. So our second column here is resistance. That's weights, using weights or your body weight. You want to have at least 2 sessions every week. There's a lot of benefits of resistance training besides brain health. We can talk a lot about muscle and bone health as well. I really want to encourage people to do resistance because most people I talk to, especially as we age, we do the cardio, we go on our walks, we go on our bike rides. We're not as good at the resistance side of things. And we need to make sure we're getting those in because those hit other areas of the brain, the frontal lobe of the brain, functional improvements. They can help to reduce how much atrophy we're getting in actual brain matter. And those improve more of the memory and executive functioning knobs. So remember that we have different areas we're looking at. We also reduce our fall risk when we're doing resistance training. The downside of resistance is it's often not enough cardiovascular. So if we're someone who's hitting the weights, you're just a total gym rat and you love to lift weights all the time, but you're not doing a lot of cardio, we want to look at all of those as well. finally, we have neuromotor, or some people call this dual tasking. Some people call it multi-domain movement. They're all the same thing. Essentially, you're looking at doing a lot. It's kind of like multitasking exercise. And this is what's studied in brain health, is you want to get 150 to 300 minutes per week. That should be a familiar number. We already saw that in cardio. And what this does is it slows progression of cognitive decline in all areas, more than single modality exercise. So what does this mean? Things like dance, yoga, sports, exergaming, where we're not just running. We're not just on the elliptical. We're not just lifting the bicep curl. We're catching a ball as we're running. We're doing lunges while counting backwards. We're playing a sport that makes us move in different directions. We're doing different things with our body and different things with our brain during that exercise movement. And so what's been studied a lot is things with choreography, like dance. Yoga has been studied a lot because you're moving in different planes and you're being told to breathe while you're doing that in different ways. And obviously sports, we're doing a lot of different movement and brain work. But this multi-domain, multitasking exercise is what's been studied to truly, truly slow progression of cognitive decline, build the cognitive reserve, and kind of slow that start of the MCI and then dementia by significant amounts, much more so than if we're just doing one type of movement. The hard part with multi-domain movement or dual tasking is to find that balance of a true challenge without excessive frustration, because it can be frustrating if someone's telling you to count backwards from 50 while catching a ball, but it's also challenging. It's creating all of that brain blood flow and neuronal connection. But if you're already maybe in mild cognitive impairment, that could be really frustrating and possibly make you not want to come back and do that again. So depending on where you are in your cognitive vitality journey, you want to find a challenge without frustration. And I want to point to this number down at the bottom, 52 hours of neuromotor or dual tasking exercise is what has been researched over and over and over again. It seems to be this gold magic number in research that truly improves total executive functioning and processing speed, independent of what exercise you're doing. So what does 52 hours look like? It's about 4 hours a week for 12 weeks. So if you're following the cardio guidelines and doing resistance training twice a week, you can expect to see true improvements in overall cognition if you were to do a brain scan, and you might actually feel those cognitive improvements in 3 to 4 months of consistency. And then that just keeps building over, you continue doing that. But if you were someone sort of starting from scratch, you're starting to feel a little slowness in your cognition, we're doing potential brain scans where we're seeing some shrinkage in the brain, we can see that regrowth and you can feel those symptoms start to change in 3 to 4 months of consistent exercise. That's how powerful exercise is. And that's aside from, doesn't matter what type of exercise you're doing, as long as there's the cardio and the resistance, the dual tasking in there. So what could this look like? Example A would be a real beginner strategy where we're working out 4 days a week for 30 to 60 minutes in those workouts. On Mondays and Fridays, we're doing a 30-minute bike, and really getting the heart rate up, and then 30 minutes of weight training with a personal trainer. On Wednesdays, we're going to a Zumba class with our buddies. Okay, so we're getting our heart rate up, and it's fun. We're doing lots of choreography, some multitasking. And on Saturday, we're walking. We're just doing that minimum heart rate increase, but we're with friends. We're talking. We're having the balance. Possibly we're walking on a dirt trail instead of a road. So now we're dealing with the cognitive impact of having to look at balancing on a dirt path. While we're talking with people, we're getting that cognitive stimulation. So don't think that just walking is not enough. There's still a lot of cognition that goes into that. I put those intensities on there too. So you realize we're not having to do super, super high intensity here. Example B would be slightly more advanced. Someone who's been working out for a while now and we're ready to turn up the dial, or maybe we're seeing some cognitive decline already and we're really motivated and we want to turn that around. That would be working out 5 days a week. We go to a dance class for 45 minutes on Monday. On Tuesday, we're doing just weights at the gym because we just did cardio yesterday. Wednesday, we do a spin class, which is actually considered multimodal because of the up and the down and the speed changing, even though you're just in one plane. Thursday, we're doing weights while talking to everybody in the gym. And on Saturday, we're doing Tai Chi, which is not cardio, but it's very much multitasking and cognitive in demand. So there's so much you can do. I don't mean for this to be overwhelming. I'm hoping that this is actually really motivating, that whatever you like to do, we can work it in. Swimming, tennis, counting backwards while you're catching balls. Like there's so much that you can kind of play with if you think of exercise as play. Okay. So exercise is the big one. If you take nothing else away from today, we need to start exercising and bringing in variety. That would be my take home for you. But there are other things we can do to keep building that cognitive reserve we talked about. And these are significant. These are not just, well, yeah, sure, you should eat healthy, but food plays a big, big piece in how big that cognitive reserve is because of the inflammatory effect of overeating. So there's something called the SAD diet, and that stands for Standard American Diet. And I think it's so sad we have that as an acronym. But the SAD diet is what you see in that little pie chart there, is that majority of our intake is very highly processed, unrecognizable as real food. So when I say processed food, I don't mean a can of beans, which is technically processed. I mean some sort of chip cracker thing that maybe has some beans in it, but also has a whole lot of other ingredients that we don't recognize. I'm talking drive-through food. I'm talking granolas and packaged things where we have no idea where the ingredients came from. That's what I mean by processed, not pre-cut bell peppers. That is the Standard American Diet is mostly processed, and then a lot of processed animal meat with a little bit of plants thrown in there. And what we see time and time again when different types of labs are studying the SAD diet versus other types of more traditional diets is that it is a significant risk factor for all types of cognitive decline, from depression and anxiety to dementia and metabolic diseases. Versus a whole food diet, which we call traditional diets. If you've ever heard of the blue zones, it doesn't mean you can't eat something that's chopped up or cooked. It just means something that's recognizable as food the majority of the time that is significantly protective of all of these conditions. So it's both. It's that the SAD diet pulls from cognition, and a whole food, more healthy diet with lots of fiber adds to cognitive reserve. So here's a way to remember how to eat healthfully is you've heard of SPF for your skin. For your food, I want you to focus on FPF, fiber, protein, fat. That's what I want to see on your plate. That's what I want to see in your lunchbox, in your snack bag. Where's your fiber? Where's your protein? Where's your healthy fat? So fiber is carb. People often think when I say this that I'm telling you to eat a no carb diet. That's not what I'm telling you to do. I'm telling you to choose carbohydrates that are very, very high in fiber, at least 25 grams per day. What does this look like? 5 cups of fruits and vegetables or other types of high fiber food every day. And if nutrition is your interest zone that you're like pinging in your brain, I want to learn more, then we can definitely talk in consultations, or you can go look at some other recordings that I've done on food specific, where I dive a lot deeper. But know that I want you to eat a lot of plants every day. And I want that to be partnered with protein. And that protein does not have to be only plants. You can eat meat, you can eat fish, you can eat beans, you can eat tofu. Choose your favorite proteins, and hopefully there's a variety of them partnered with all that fiber all day long. That's what plant-based is really supposed to mean, is that your diet is based on plants with the other things filtered in, not that you're only eating plants. And then healthy fats. This one is oftentimes forgotten, especially when we're talking about brain health. Our brain has fat in it, and our brain cells, the whole outside is made of fat, and the tissues and the linings are made of fat. And so when we go on fat-free diets, we deprive our poor brain of this really essential nutrient. When you've heard the term omega-3s, those primarily go to the brain for the most part. That's why we like walnuts, because they actually look like little brains because they're high in omega-3s. So we want to be eating avocados and seeds and nuts and eggs and fatty fish and plant-based oils. These are the things we want to focus on in our diet, because when we're eating for brain health, we're looking to minimize inflammation, which means minimizing ultra-processed foods. We want to maximize nutrient absorption, which means lots of fiber. And we want to enhance our gut health, which means lots of fiber and lots of healthy fat. When we do those things, we are directly impacting the brain. Side note, kind of a fun little party trick for you to know is that the brain and the gut were actually, when you were born as a fetus, not right when you were born, when you were a fetus, before you were born, was one cell, and it divided. And they are truly connected by the gut. So they share a very, very similar microbiome. They share a lot of bacteria. So what you do in the gut directly impacts the brain. So we want lots of fiber for that reason. So in general, this is what our plates should look like. You've probably seen different versions of this, but every time you have a meal, half of the plate should be vegetables, and then the rest is mixed between protein and high fiber starches. Okay, and then we throw some healthy fat in there, whether that's a dressing on the vegetable, or maybe it's a fattier piece of meat that particular day and you don't need to have oil on your vegetable. You can add that fat wherever it makes sense. But most people I talk to, this is flip-flop to where starches are on the veggie side and we maybe have some veggies in that fat section in the middle and then a whole big old piece of protein. We want to kind of readjust what that plate looks like so that we are feeding the right areas of our body that feed the brain. Okay, so then the other piece, we had fitness, we had food, and now we have rest, stress, and stimulation. And I always kind of put these in the same bucket. We'll go through each of these a little bit individually, but they all do the same thing. When we're talking about stimulating our brain or resting our brain or talking about stress resilience, we're trying to do the same thing, do the same goals. We're looking to allow for those restorative pathways to function. Our body has recovery and restorative processes, and they can't do the restorative work if we're in stress mode or if we haven't slept enough, okay? We also want to minimize inflammation and plaque buildup. That's a big piece of cognitive decline, especially with dementia, is that we're building plaque in our brains. And that happens when we're not allowing the body to rest and recover. There's a whole recovery process when we sleep that kind of gets rid of icky plaques. So if we're not recovering, if we're always stressed, we're not going to allow the body to get rid of that plaque. We want to stimulate neurogenesis. So not only do we want to create an environment in the brain where there's less plaque, where there's ability to think, but we want to be firing those neurons and actually creating lots of thought processes up there to build that cognitive reserve. We want to take advantage of the cognitive domains that are maybe of greater functioning. So maybe you have started to feel like your memory has significantly declined and we're starting to be worried about that. But your executive function, not so much. You can make good decisions. You can completely understand the conversations around you. Let's do more of that. Take advantage of those processes in your brain that you feel confident in and do more of it because it will trickle down to the others. And that's where we'll talk about the brain stimulation a little bit more. And again, building that cognitive reserve. So let's talk about sleep first. We have different systems that happen when we sleep. There's a lot of different things that go on, but very specifically, there's something called the glymphatic system. You've probably heard of lymphatic. That's our body's detox pathways. We have something called glymphatic with a G, which is really truly think of it as a shower in your brain. It's a type of liquid. It's called glymphatic fluid, and it turns on and flushes the system and can get rid of some of that sticky plaque building up, any toxins that have built up in the brain. This doesn't happen unless we have reached deep sleep. That is the only time your glymphatic system can turn on. So if we're not reaching deep sleep, if we're only sleeping a couple of hours really spotchily throughout the night, we're not doing that cleanup process in the brain. We're also not allowing for our immune function to kind of rebuild itself, to slough off old cells that are creating kind of gunked up DNA. Emotional regulation. This, when we sleep, is when our brains get to put together all the emotions and thoughts and experiences we had that day, which can help us with mood disorders the next day. So if we're not sleeping deeply, we're not able to process those experiences and emotions we felt. And cellular restructuring, building back up the healthy cells is what happens during sleep. So when we have sleep deprivation, we're much more likely to suffer injury, to have insulin resistance, and to have dementia. 35% more likely to have dementia when we have consistently poor sleep. And poor sleep, by the way, is considered less than 7 hours a night. Just one night of that one night of less than 7 hours can put some people at the level of cognition that you would be at if you were legally drunk. So we don't want to have that. We want to have really good sleep, at least 7 hours. A lot of the research around truly sleep deprivation is considered less than 4 hours a night. But there was actually a really interesting study done on college kids, and they watched them for a week during finals prep. And these college kids, very healthy, young, no cognitive issues, had 4 nights in a row of less than 4 hours of sleep while they were studying. And at the end of just those 4 nights, they all had blood sugar levels that of a diabetic. And when we have blood sugar levels that are elevated, we have cognitive concerns as well. So we want to make sure we're focusing on sleep for all these issues. Poor sleep is also one of the known positive predictors for Alzheimer's disease and can precede that by years. So again, we're thinking of that, preventing that onset of that deep, sharp red arrow of dementia. Sleep is one of the major ones. Okay, so we want to get at least 4, but ideally 7 hours of good sleep as often as we can throughout the week. And these are just some things that can help with that. We're not always thinking about all of these. Sleeping in silence. So a lot of people sleep with the TV on or radio on. So silence or white noise, and darkness. I actually have some clients who will say they sleep with the TV on, but they turn the sound off, but you still have that brightness, that light coming in. So darkness, silence. Trying not to eat at least 2 hours before bed, because your body is then having to go through digestive processes and not sleep processes. Not sleeping and not having alcohol as often, at least not close to bedtime. Moving a little bit in the evening or just moving throughout the day. We're going back to activity. If you have not exercised very much, it's very hard to get into deep sleep. Caffeine after noon can make some people not be able to get to deep sleep. Looking at the comfort of your bed, even your temperature, consistent sleep and wake times. This is something called social jet lag. If tonight you go to bed at 10, tomorrow you're going to bed at 8, the next day midnight, you're just all over the place. Your body actually has a really hard time adjusting and getting into sleep cycles. And that can, even if you're sleeping 7 hours, can disrupt that sleep. And then being careful with things like TV and computer screens before bed. So then we have stress resilience, and so sleep is a piece of that. If we're not sleeping well, we don't handle stress as well. We have kind of more chronic inflammation, which is a stressor to the body. So they're very much connected. But sleep aside, there are other things we can do to combat stress. And I don't mean getting rid of stress. Obviously, do if you can. But I mean how we handle stress. Because when we're prone to anxiety around any type of stressor, that is where we get an inflammatory reaction, because we're having hormones that spike that create inflammation because the body thinks we're in stress mode. And there's a lot that can happen with aging the brain when we're chronically stressed, because the brain can't recover, the brain can't have all of those awesome connections going on. So we want to do everything we can to calm our response to stress. And these are just all pictures of things that are really great strategies for that have been researched. Tai Chi and yoga have so much data around them, as if you practice them at least once a week, your body starts to remember how to breathe in that really calm way. It's this really amazing reaction of it's a learned response when we breathe through our stress. So Tai Chi and yoga once a week or more. Just breath exercises in general. There's something called the box breath, where you breathe in for the count of 4, hold for the count of 4, breathe out for the count of 4, hold for the count of 4, a box. And if you do that 3 times, your cortisol comes down and your heart rate normalizes. So sometimes, when we're stressed, we automatically go, it's because that actually helps to do that long exhale. So doing a box breath when we're feeling stressed can be very helpful. Gratitude journaling, laughter, social stimulation, music, and there's something called ikigai in Japanese culture, which is purpose. Having a purpose, and it doesn't have to be changing the world purpose. It could be, my purpose is to babysit my grandkids today. My purpose is to have coffee with my best friend. But why are you getting up in the morning? The bigger that purpose is, the more stress resilience you have. And this has been researched in various types of communities across the world. And so finally, we'll wrap all this up with cognitive stimulation. Remember, that was one of the positives that impacts our cognitive reserve, is the more stimulation you have, the more cognitive reserve you have. So social and sensory input. So you have cognitive input and cognitive stimulation simply by interacting with other people, which is why isolation and loneliness is such a problem for anyone, but especially as we get older, because you're missing that really key component of cognitive stimulation. We have high risks of other types of metabolic diseases, 50% increase in risk of dementia simply by being lonely. So just hanging out with people, forget like all the other techniques, just being around other humans on a daily basis will help combat the onset of dementia and continue to build up that cognitive reserve. But there are other things you can do that are really purposeful too, as far as like stimulating your brain, doing things that are novel or new. So learning a new skill, taking a class, going a different pathway on your walk, reading a different type of book. Maybe you always read novels, try nonfiction. Stimulate your brain in this new way, creates triggers, and it creates that neurogenesis. If it's meaningful, then it will help with the memory and the attention span. So for instance, when you learn someone's name and it's the name of your daughter, you're like, oh, I'm always going to remember your name because it's the name of my daughter. It's meaningful to me. So the more you can create meaning around your experiences, the more your brain will remember it. And that's a really good memory and attention strategy. Creating emotion, and even negative emotions. But if you think back on some of your most vibrant memories, there's usually a strong emotion attached to that, be it happiness or sadness. But when there's a lot of emotion around an experience, we almost can't forget that. That's when the memories are ingrained. So we're talking about more of the memory knob of cognition, but the more emotion that's wrapped up in that, the better. So if you can create emotion around an experience, think of how that makes you happy, you'll remember it better. When it's applicable, when whatever you're doing really applies to your life and you can make yourself think how it applies, you'll remember it better, you'll pay more attention. Okay, challenging and rewarding. If something comes with a reward or if you're challenged, it's going to create more synapses. And that's where that exergaming and sports comes into play. The more challenge, the more you create a bigger volume of brain in thinking through it. If it's repeatable, and this doesn't mean I want you to be doing the same thing over time, but if you're experiencing something or reading something, you want to make sure it's something you could do again, or try and train your brain on thinking, how could I do this again? Because you're more likely to learn that thing. And then some purposeful strategies, we will go through those next. These are purposeful cognitive strategies to help with paying attention, to help with your response, so your cognition around it, to help with your memory, and also to help with your processing speed. Write it down. Sticky notes are helpful. The more you write something down and actually take notes versus just trying to remember it, the more it will cement and you'll pay more attention because you're writing it down, you're dual tasking, you'll remember it more. Repeating it. Hi, my name is Megan. Hi, Megan, it's nice to meet you. Like actually repeating it back, you're cementing it in. There's a strategy called chunking, or putting things to categories. So if you're maybe trying to remember your grocery list, you can remember them in chunks of fruits, vegetables, and dairy products. Those are ways of chunking, putting them into categories, or making meaningful connections, like I already said before, with a name. Sensory connections, remembering the smell that came along with this thing you're trying to experience will cement it in further. It also helps with processing speed. Letter and word games. So let's say we'll go back to that grocery list. If you have to remember that you need blueberries, raspberries, and bananas, BRB. And maybe that is a funny acronym for you, like BRB, be right back. You can come up with those things. Visualizations, imagining yourself in that space is very helpful for both processing speed, memory, and attention. Storytelling or making songs. So I think we all kind of do this. You kind of like can't come up with a song, a sing song to remember the thing. Or exercising. What research has shown is we remember and pay more attention to things if we exercise an hour before we do it or an hour after. So if you know you really want to pay attention at that doctor's appointment and remember a lot of what he said, maybe you go for a 30-minute walk before and you go do a Zumba dance class sometime later in that day afterward, and that will cement more because of all that blood flow and those growth and hormone, the growth hormones and endorphins that come along with exercise. So we're going to practice that now. I hope you've been paying attention, because I want you to think to yourself, what does this image mean? And you don't have to unmute, but just think to yourself, say it out loud to yourself. What does this image represent? And hopefully you said cognitive reserve. Okay, because I put this image in here as a visualization, a visual reminder of what cognitive reserve means. So now whenever you're thinking of, gosh, I need to be building my cognitive reserve, you're thinking of literally a gas tank in your brain, right? There's visualization. That's a strategy you can use. Another pop quiz. What are 3 components to a healthy brain meal plan? I told you a way to remember this. It was a letter game. It was an acronym. FPFs, remember? Don't forget your SPF when you go outside. Don't forget your FPFs when you are eating. Fiber, protein, and fat. Those are the keys to a healthy brain diet. So let's play a different game. Let's do our grocery list. These are 5 healthy brain foods that we have to go buy later today when we go to the grocery store. I need to get blueberries, salmon, spinach, flaxseed, and avocados. How am I going to remember these 5 things? Okay, we can do letter association. We can think B, S, S, F, A. I came up with one that is avocados are my BFFs. Avocados, blueberries, fish, flax, spinach. So if I'm telling myself avocados are my BFFs, when I get to the grocery store, I don't need my list. And doing these things, by the way, you don't need to do them when you have memory issues. Doing them now before you have any types of concerns for memory issues, that type of letter association, that game playing is stimulating neurogenesis in your brain right now and building cognitive reserve. So I'm not telling you memory strategies to do one day when you start having less memory ability. I'm telling you to do them now to build your memory reserve. Try not to write a grocery list down. Try and remember them. Try not to print out a Google map or use your phone. Try and just get to the grocery store without it. Build that cognitive reserve. Another thing you could do to remember these 5 things is a story. The circle of life, circle being blueberries, is that you have to plant seeds, flax seeds, to get the leaves, spinach, to get the fruit, avocado, that gets eaten by the animal, the fish. Like, you can tell yourself that story to remember and trigger those things. So this was your concept of how can you remember those 5 things. These were my 2 ideas of remembering that list. And either way, there's no right way, the letter association versus the story. Do both. Challenge your brain. Remember, challenge and novelty to try to remember things in different ways. So those are our guys. So just to wrap things up, lifestyle factors that influence brain health and cognition. Can you think of what they are based on the visualizations I'm giving you now? I'll give you 2 seconds to say them out loud. What are all of, and I didn't show you all of these images earlier. I'm just trying to trigger your processing speed to remember them. Physical activity or exercise or multimodal movement, however you want to say it, move your body a lot every day. That will build your cognitive reserve so much. And even once cognitive reserve starts going down and we're having cognitive decline, physical activity helps to keep it from falling off the cliff. That is your number 1. Sleep, super significant to restoring that brain health. Okay. Food, super significant to not getting inflammation into our systems. Stress, but more stress resilience is what we're looking for. Medications can definitely help. Medications can also create a risk. So looking at how many medications you're on, and that might tell you how much harder you have to work. Age and comorbidities are something we can't necessarily always change, but that is a risk factor. Cognitive stimulation, talking to people, doing things that are new, doing things that are challenging, making memory games for yourself and trying to make your brain work. How many people actually know more than 2 phone numbers, off the top of your head? We don't remember them anymore. Try and remember someone's phone number. And then the social support, having that social network, talking to people. If you can't talk to someone in person, talk to them on the phone. Make a social connection a priority every single day, because that also leads to better stress resilience, more cognitive stimulation, more motivation to go exercise if you're exercising with someone else. Okay, so these all go together. I'm going to leave you with this. This is a program that we've started working with them. They're completely different. They're called New Days AI. They're not a St. Jude product or business, but they are a cognitive rehab program that is online. So this is for those of you who may already be in that MCI tower, that MCI range. If you are not, this is not for you. New Days is truly for someone who is already experiencing cognitive decline and is recommended to have cognitive therapy from a physician. This is a company that you can do that online, which is really nice for some people who are experiencing cognitive decline, do not have to drive somewhere. Medicare does cover this. And then there's a whole AI component where you can have conversation with a robot online to have those conversations and cognitive stimulation, if that's something that maybe isn't as available to you, if you live alone or you're not able to get out of the house. So it's just something for either those of you that are listening today, or maybe you know someone who could really benefit from cognitive rehab. It's something that is available, and I'm happy to assist that conversation, refer you there if necessary. Just reach out to me. All right, with that, we have some time for questions. And before I pull those up, this is what's coming up on the agenda here at the Wellness Center. I am teaching a cooking class, an online cooking class, all about brain boosting foods. So we'll learn a little bit more about the food piece on the 24th at 11:30. That's always free. Our other dietitian, Lynn, teaches mini classes here, and these are free 20-minute sessions. These are in person here at the Wellness Center, but she always focuses on just one type of specific food, and you get to either taste it or look at the labels and learn a lot more about it. Those are select Wednesdays at noon. Those are on our website. You can register there. I will be teaching a mini series masterclass on blood sugar management using continuous glucose monitors later in October. So if you'd like to learn about that program and see if that's for you, that will be an overview webinar on the 2nd at noon. And of course, we have memberships here, and we have a brain gym coming soon. We just put in the purchasing order. We had a beautiful donation last year, and it's taken us some time, but we are implementing fitness equipment for dual tasking and exergaming. It should be here by the end of the year. So please be sure you're on our mailing list so you know when that comes up, because we can actually guide you on all this awesome dual tasking fitness that I just told you about. Let me pull up the questions. Please feel free to put those in the chat, and we will spend the rest of our time on Q&A. Just in case you came in late, if you have to go, that's fine. This recording will be up on the website within a day or two, usually. If you have headphones and have a sleep story on to fall asleep, does that interrupt your sleep process? No, assuming it's turning off at some point. It would interrupt sleep process if it never turns off, if you're constantly getting input while you're sleeping. But most of these types of like sleep story apps, they turn off, or you can turn on some sort of like function on it where it does turn off after a certain amount of time. So it's helping you get to sleep, and then you're sleeping on your own with no auditory input, and that can help you get to deep sleep. So that's a great strategy for falling asleep, just making sure it turns off at some point. Do interactive Zoom classes count as stimulation? You bet they do. Even if you're not interacting, just today's Zoom class, your brain was firing, learning all these things, assuming what I taught today was new and novel for you, you were learning. So that is cognitive stimulation. Even better if it's interactive and you're turning on your microphone and you're talking and you're asking questions. Even better if you're in person and then you go for a walk afterwards. So there's all these different levels of stimulation. But yes, learning is cognitive stimulation. Executive function. And I don't know if that was a question. How soon and often should we exercise when we are sick, like having a cough and are feeling more tired than usual? that is listen to the body. If you are actively sick, take time off. Try and move around your house a little bit so that you're not just laying still all day long, but definitely do not try to actively exercise if you're in the throes of a sickness. Once you've recovered, sometimes there's that lingering stuff that just lasts for a couple of weeks. You're not actively sick anymore, but you still have a little cough or you're still a little tired. But you're not actually sick. That is when you want to kind of be easing back into exercise. Go for walks around your neighborhood. Maybe try taking like a low impact dance class, but maybe you're not doing heavy weights. Definitely don't do any high intensity like sprinting or spinning, but start getting your body moving again. And you would do that just as often as your body can. Listening to your body really well. If you're feeling really overwhelming, exhausted, tired, would not be the time to do an intense exercise, but a little bit of a walk might perk you back up and bring your energy back. What kind of exercise should we do if we have plantar fasciitis or osteoarthritis in the feet? That would be a personal trainer question. There's lots of different things that you can do though, with whether you have just inflammation or full osteoporosis going on. But you definitely want to work with a trainer who can figure out your needs, but know that there's a lot. There's even things like vibration plates that you can just sit and put your feet on and get that blood flowing in your feet. Things like biking. There's lots that you can do that isn't high intensity, but work with a trainer who's going to be able to help you meet that need. Do Zoom classes count as socialization? I would say if you're just listening to the Zoom class, not really. You want to be interacting for it to be social. So it's stimulation because you're learning, but if you're not interacting together, it's not socialization. That's a good question, a good differentiation. What kind of exercise does ping pong count as? So it depends on how intense you're exercising. If you're like bouncing around because you're a professional ping pong player and your heart rate is actually increasing, that would actually be aerobic cardio. Otherwise, it would be considered dual tasking. So you're gaming. So you're having to know the rules. You're having to watch the ball. You're having to make your hand go in the right spot to hit the ball and hit it with the right coordination. So it'd be like a coordinative dual tasking motor learning exercise, but not quite aerobic, definitely not resistance. It's really great for cognition, but we'd want to make sure we're adding aerobic activity to your week if ping pong is your main source of fitness. Did I get through all the questions? I think I did. All righty. Well, if you come up with more questions, or if you want information on new days, or you want a little bit more info on how to register for these programs or what they mean, please reach out to me. You can just email stjudewellness@stjoe.org if you don't have my contact, and they'll get it to me. And stjudewellnesscenter.org under the events tab is where you would find all of our programs, from free ones to cash pay ones. And like I said, please be on our mailing list because I will send out information on the opening of our brain gym when that comes up. So you are welcome. Have an excellent day. I do see one question that popped up. What food will increase my skin collagen? Collagen. So collagen powder would definitely do that, as well as any types of proteins are going to help build skin tissue. So you're welcome. Thank you so much, everyone. Recording will be posted soon. Have an excellent week. Go do some brain health fitness. Bye, everybody.